Forget what the dime novels told you. Real lawmen didn't swagger into saloons with gleaming revolvers and polished badge shine. Off-duty, they blended in, coat buttoned, eyes sharp, and something deadly hidden where no one looked. These were the secret weapons of the frontier's peacekeepers: palm pistols, vest guns, weighted saps, and blades small enough to vanish inside a boot. Every mark and modification was built for one reason: survival when backup was a day's ride away. Today, we're uncovering 15 weapons history tried to forget. The concealed tools lawmen trusted when they weren't wearing the star. And the line between going home alive or ending up a name in a ledger. No legends, no Hollywood heroics, just the truth. The quiet, clever, and sometimes reckless as hell weapons of the men who walk the line between order and chaos. So button your vest, keep your hand close, and meet the weapon so small it could disappear in your palm, yet kill at arm's length. Number 15, the sword cane, the gentleman's secret blade. Not every lawman on the frontier carried his weapon where you could see it. Some hid theirs in plain sight, disguised as something any gentleman might carry down a dusty street. The sword cane was that disguise. Remington patented a firing version in 1858, but the blade type was already popular among men who couldn't wear a gun on their belt. In towns like Dodge City or Tombstone, ordinances made open carry illegal inside limits. So off-duty sheriffs, judges, and detectives found quieter solutions. A twist of the handle revealed a long, narrow blade, forged for one motion: draw and thrust. Some were plain steel, others engraved or nickel-plated, bought from outfitters in New York and New Orleans. It was a weapon for travel, for walking through crowds, for lawmen who wanted to look unarmed but never be unprepared. Contemporary newspapers even joked about the man with the polite cane who never tripped. Everyone knew what that meant. You weren't limping, you were armed. The sword cane blurred the line between civility and survival, because on the frontier, manners might open a door, but steel kept it open. Number 14, brass knuckles, the dirty equalizer. They weren't fancy, and they weren't legal for long. But for lawmen off-duty, brass knuckles were the quiet answer to a loud problem. The frontier didn't always call for bullets. Sometimes it called for one hit that ended a fight before anyone drew steel. Police blotters from the 1870s and 80s, from St. Louis to San Antonio, list arrests for concealed knuckles. They were everywhere, even among the men meant to enforce the law. Cast in brass, iron, or lead, they fit the hand like a second set of bones. Detectives kept them in coat linings, sheriffs in belt pouches. One swing could break a jaw or drop a drunk without firing a shot. Crucial in towns where a single gunshot started panic. By the late 1880s, most territories banned them outright, calling them cowards' weapons. But the lawmen who carried them had their own logic. Better to risk a fine than a funeral. Brass knuckles weren't about honor. They were about control. Fast, silent, and absolute. Number 13, slungshot, the street fighter's trick. Before the blackjack and the baton, there was the slungshot, a weapon so simple every outlaw and off-duty lawman knew how to make one. A length of cord, a knot, and a lump of lead or iron at the end. One swing, and it could crush bone or drop a man cold. Sailors brought the design west in the 1840s, using it first to throw lines across decks. On land, it became the weapon of the desperate, gamblers, brawlers, and peace officers who needed something fast and silent. By the 1870s, city ordinances from Denver to New Orleans had banned them outright, calling them instruments of concealed violence. Still, they lingered. A deputy on night patrol might carry one coiled in his coat pocket just in case talk failed before backup arrived. Newspaper reports from Kansas and Missouri record arrests for assault with a slungshot, proof they were common on both sides of the badge. It didn't jam, didn't misfire, and didn't draw a crowd like a gun. One good strike could end a fight before it began. No bullet, no sound, no witnesses. a piece of rope, a bit of lead, and a steady hand. The simplest kind of power the frontier ever saw. Number 12, Blackjack Sour Sap, the lawman's quiet persuader. Not every weapon on the frontier made noise. Some were built for silence and control. The blackjack, or sap, was the lawman's answer to both. A short leather pouch filled with lead shot, stitched tight and small enough to slip inside a coat pocket. When swung, it hit like a hammer, fast, brutal, and discreet. New York officers carried them by the 1870s, and frontier deputies soon followed, calling them persuaders. They weren't meant to kill, at least not officially. A single blow to the temple could knock a man cold, or worse, depending on the angle. Marshals used them to end bar fights, break up brawls, or subdue drunks without firing a shot. The sap kept order where gunfire would cause chaos. A Denver paper in 1881 called it the officer's silent partner, describing how a deputy dropped 2 armed drunks before his revolver ever cleared the holster. That's why the blackjack spread from eastern alleys to western saloons, because it worked. Made of layered leather or flat spring steel wrapped in hide, the best versions flexed just enough to whip back into the hand. Simple, effective, forgettable. It wasn't heroic, it was practical. The quiet, hard edge of frontier justice. Number 11, folding pocket knife, the everyday lifesaver. Some weapons were carried for show. Others stayed hidden until the moment mattered. The folding pocket knife belonged to the second kind. Every lawman kept one, not for prestige, but because it worked. They cut rope, sharpened pencils, trimmed cigars, and whittled through long nights on patrol. That same knife could turn into a last line of defense when the revolver was out of reach. By the 1870s, folding knives from makers like Case and Camillus came cheap through mail orders and hardware stores. 2, 3, or 4-inch blades, carbon steel, bone, or wooden handles. No need for a holster, no law against carrying one. It was the invisible weapon everyone owned. Newspapers out of Kansas and Oklahoma mention officers using pocket knives in close fights, usually when ambushed or wrestling a suspect to the ground. A palm-sized blade could open a man from wrist to ribs if the moment demanded it. Some officers even modified their knives with thumb studs or half-stops for faster draw, long before switchblades existed. They were simple, sharp, and silent, part of a lawman's gear, even if it wasn't on the record. The pocket knife was never for show. It was the last resort, the small, worn piece of steel that kept a good man breathing at the end of a bad day. Number 10, Bowie knife, the blade that built a reputation. Long before the badge meant authority, the Bowie knife did. It was the frontier's original equalizer, a slab of steel that settled more fights than any revolver ever did. The design was born from a blood feud. In 1827, Jim Bowie's legendary sandbar duel turned his oversized hunting knife into a national obsession. By the time lawmen patrolled Texas and Arkansas decades later, nearly every man on the trail carried a version of it. 10 to 15 inches of forged iron confidence. Blacksmiths across the South copied the pattern, each claiming to know Bowie's true design. Some curved like a saber, others straight as a butcher's blade. For officers and rangers, it was both weapon and tool. Clearing brush 1 minute, guarding your life the next. It could split bone, cut rope, or pin a man's hand to a saloon counter. Frontier doctors even reported Bowie wounds as their own category. Deep, ragged, and almost always fatal. Unlike the pocket knife, the Bowie wasn't something you hid. It hung from a belt or saddle, a warning more than an accessory. Every scratch on the blade told a story. A brawl, a raid, a night that almost went the other way. By the late 19th century, revolvers had replaced it in most towns, but the legend stuck. The Bowie knife became shorthand for grit itself, a reminder that in the early West, law wasn't enforced by paper. It was carved in steel. Quick question, if you could only carry one weapon back then, would you take a blade like this or trust a hidden pistol instead? Tell me below. I'll pin the smartest answer. Number 9. Pocket revolver, the marshal's second gun. Every man with a badge knew the rule. One gun was never enough. The pocket revolver was insurance, small, quick, and usually hidden somewhere only its owner knew. These weren't the heavy Colts or Remingtons of the main holster. They were the little brothers, short-barreled .32s and .38s from Smith & Wesson, Hopkins & Allen, and Iver Johnson. Most slipped clean into a coat or vest pocket, hammerless and smooth so they wouldn't snag on fabric. For marshals and detectives, that second gun wasn't for showdowns. It was for the moment a brawl hit the floor or a suspect grabbed their main revolver. A pocket pistol drawn inches from a target ended the fight fast. Old arrest ledgers mentioned palm guns and belly guns, slang for the same idea, a weapon meant for arm's length, not distance. Lawmen called them get-off-me guns, and they saved lives when space disappeared. Manufacturers leaned into it. By the 1880s, S&W's safety hammerless was nicknamed the Lemon Squeezer, built for a single hand and a single purpose. It fired through a coat pocket if it had to, and sometimes it did. The pocket revolver was the great equalizer's backup, small enough to hide, fast enough to end the fight, and quiet enough to keep it out of the papers. Number 8. Derringer, the gambler's secret weapon. In a crowded saloon, a big gun was a bad idea. Elbows, smoke, and too much whiskey left no room for a full-sized revolver. That's why the Derringer ruled the tables. It was barely 6 inches long and could vanish inside a vest, sleeve, or lady's purse. One squeeze, one shot, usually .41 caliber, close range, and unforgiving. The kind of weapon you only needed once. Gamblers, barkeeps, and off-duty lawmen carried them for the same reason. No one saw it coming. A Derringer could rest on the table under a folded hand, waiting for the wrong word or the wrong move. In an age where saloon fights ended in seconds, concealment was everything. The design came from Henry Derringer of Philadelphia, a single-shot percussion pistol that spread west fast. Cheap imitations followed, then the Remington double barrel that became a classic. Some were pearl-handled, others plain iron, but all served one purpose: to keep their owner breathing in a place where cheating meant dying. Lawmen liked them because they passed unnoticed. One could sit under a coat lapel or rest in a pocket watch pouch, ready to speak when diplomacy failed. A Derringer didn't look like much, but it taught the West one of its hardest truths. Power didn't always come from size. Sometimes it fit in the palm of your hand. Number 7. Boot pistol, the hidden heel of the law. Down on the frontier streets, a man's last defense often sat where no one would ever look, inside his boot. The boot pistol was a backup for the backup, hidden steel for when everything else went wrong. Small percussion guns and short-barreled Derringers fit perfectly inside the top of a riding boot, pressed against leather and sweat. They weren't comfortable, but they were close, and that mattered. A seated lawman, riding a horse or guarding a jail cell, could draw straight from the boot when a belt gun was out of reach. The trick wasn't the weapon, it was the discipline. Drawing from the boot meant training your balance, knowing your angles, and trusting muscle memory more than speed. Frontier deputies practiced with empty guns just to avoid shooting through their own feet. Boot pistols came in dozens of makes: tiny Colts, Allen, and Thurber pepper boxes, cut-down percussion pistols sawed short by local gunsmiths. Some men kept them wrapped in cloth to keep out grit, others loaded but never cleaned, one desperate shot if luck ran out. For lawmen, it wasn't about comfort, it was about options. In a world where every fight was close and dirty, the boot pistol reminded them of one thing: you only lose when you run out of steel. Number 6. Pepper box, the multi-barreled relic. Before the revolver became king, the pepper box was its noisy, over-engineered ancestor. 6 barrels, 1 grip, and a whole lot of chaos. It fired fast for its day, but not always straight. Lawmen and travelers carried them in the 1830s through the 1850s, long before the Colt Peacemaker existed. Allen and Thurber made some of the best, with rotating barrels that turned when you cocked the hammer. Each barrel held a single charge. No cylinder, no ejector, just raw repetition. For an off-duty marshal, it was a compromise between speed and reliability. 6 shots meant security. Misfires meant danger. A few seconds of smoke and confusion could decide who walked away. Most men carried them in coat pockets or saddlebags, the muzzles capped with wax to keep out dust. When Colt's revolvers hit the market, the pepper box vanished almost overnight. It was too heavy, too crude, and too unpredictable. But for a generation, it was the only multi-shot pistol a frontier lawman could hide under his coat. Every scar on a surviving pepper box tells the same story. A weapon built on ambition, fired in fear, and replaced by something smarter. The revolver may have perfected the idea, but the pepper box proved it first. Number 5. Palm pistol, the secret weapon in the hand. It didn't look like a gun, and that was the point. The palm pistol was the frontier's strangest experiment in self-defense, a weapon you could hide in plain sight. Instead of a trigger, it had a button. Instead of a barrel you aimed, it had one you pointed like a finger. The shooter wrapped a fist around the body, pressed the stud with the thumb, and fired a single metallic cough. One motion, one shot, one surprise. The most famous was the Protector palm pistol, patented in 1882 by Jacques Turbiot in France and sold in the U.S. by Minneapolis Arms. It fired a .32 caliber cartridge from a circular frame, a strange marriage of engineering and paranoia. Lawmen and detectives bought them for deep concealment, the kind of weapon meant for a handshake gone bad. They were marketed to ladies and travelers, but plenty of off-duty officers kept one tucked in a coat pocket. It could slip past a saloon search or disappear in a vest with no outline at all. Few of these odd pistols survived long. They jammed easily and hit hard, only at breath's distance. But for a brief moment, they embodied the hidden mindset of the frontier lawman. Trust your instincts, keep your weapon close, and make sure no one sees it coming. Number 4. Truncheon or nightstick, the symbol of authority. Before a badge meant anything, a club did. The truncheon, or nightstick, was the first language of authority on both sides of the Atlantic, and the frontier carried that tradition west. City police had used them since the 1820s, short hardwood batons meant to subdue without killing. As towns like Abilene, Dodge, and Denver grew, lawmen brought the same tools with them. Hickory, ash, or oak, plain wood with a leather strap through the handle. For off-duty officers, a shortened version rode under a coat or inside a saddlebag. It was simple, legal to carry, and useful for everything from breaking windows to breaking up fights. A truncheon didn't need ammunition, it needed timing. Some departments had them carved with initials or inlaid with brass caps, but most were rough and personal, a stick shaped by the hand that used it. In a brawl, one swing across the wrist or jaw ended things fast and without the noise of a revolver. By the late 18th century, the nightstick had become part of the lawman's image, the visible edge of order. On duty or off, it was both message and weapon, compliance by persuasion or by pain. The truncheon was proof that the West didn't run on bullets alone. Sometimes law was just a length of wood in the right hands. Number 3. Cane gun, the gentleman's hidden shot. It looked like good manners. Polished wood, silver tip, maybe even a carved handle. But inside that walking cane was a secret no one expected. A gun. Cane guns were the mechanical cousins of the sword cane, built for men who preferred deception over draw speed. The first real examples appeared in the 1850s, with Remington's single-shot .22 model leading the way. Twist the handle, aim the tip, squeeze the hidden trigger, and a puff of smoke left the air smelling like gunpowder and surprise. They were never common, but they were real. Wealthy travelers and undercover officers valued them for one reason: plausible innocence. You could stroll through any town unarmed, at least to anyone watching. The law didn't always know how to classify them. Some states banned them outright, others never mentioned them at all. Most cane guns were custom-built, their barrels disguised inside ash, ebony, or even ivory shafts. Some fired shotgun shells, others tiny pistol rounds. A few models hid spring-loaded triggers that only released when the cane was twisted just right. For a lawman working alone or far from help, the cane gun offered one small advantage: the element of surprise. No holster, no telltale outline, just quiet power waiting at arm's length. On the frontier, appearance meant everything. A polished gentleman's cane said refinement until it spoke. Number 2. Sleeve or pocket dagger, the last resort surprise. When distance vanished and talking was done, some lawmen reached for steel they never meant anyone to see. The sleeve dagger wasn't a dueling weapon. It was a secret kept for the worst-case moment. A thin, double-edged blade hid in a sewn pocket under the coat sleeve or vest. One flick of the wrist and it slid into the palm, ready before the other man realized it existed. No gun, no draw, just a whisper of steel. These blades came from boot knives cut short or barber's razors ground to a point. Small shops from New Orleans to Kansas City sold gentlemen's defense knives, but most were homemade. For detectives, gamblers, and off-duty marshals, it was insurance against the grab when a suspect closed the distance or a hand went for their gun. In crowded saloons and train cars, firing a revolver could start a panic. A concealed blade kept things quiet. One thrust ended the fight, and the room barely noticed. There were no records, no patents, and no official models. The sleeve dagger lived in the gray space between tool and taboo, too small to register, too close to forgive. It was the weapon of last resort, carried not for power, but for survival. The silent answer when every other option was gone. Number 1. Improvised concealed tools, the weapons you'd never notice. The strangest, deadliest things a lawman carried weren't sold in shops. They were ordinary objects, altered, hidden, and turned into weapons when a fight left no time for choice. Lead weights stitched into a boot cuff, a length of iron wired inside a belt, a hammerhead wrapped in cloth and tucked beneath a coat. Simple work tools and bits of hardware that became lethal the moment they were needed. Court testimony and coroner's inquests from frontier towns occasionally list these improvised instruments by name, not because they were exotic, but because judges had to describe what killed a man. That's the sort of proof that matters. Evidence in a courtroom, not a museum label. Prison inventories and arrest records also show it. Smugglings of pipe segments, hidden files, even tins of lead kept in pockets. Men who worked with iron and rope already carried parts of a weapon every day. Turning them into one was a matter of making the smallest change. Nobody packed a weapon so much as carried a thing that could become one. The point isn't novelty, it's inevitability. When towns banned open arms, people adapted. When a lawman needed to stop a fight without gunfire, he used what he had. Those improvised tools were the most honest weapons on the frontier, unseen until they weren't, and deadly exactly when the moment demanded it. If all the fancy gadgets failed, a man with a hammer, a handful of lead, or a hidden shard of metal still had a chance. That's the last lesson the West taught. The deadliest tool is the one you never expected. 15 hidden weapons, each one proof that the real West didn't look like the movies. Lawmen didn't walk tall with gleaming six-shooters and spotless badges. They carried what worked: the quiet, clever, and the desperate. Every nick in a blade, every worn grip, every dented club meant the same thing: survival. No myths, no legends, just the tools that kept order in a world without backup. If you made it this far, you already know this isn't Hollywood history. It's the truth of the frontier. Hit subscribe, and I'll show you what they carried next.